My question kind of independently was, I was thinking about, okay, you brought up mainland denominations, right, and this massive decline in attendance, right, across Episcopal, Presbyterian, right, Methodist, these mainline organizations. And I'm kind of curious, there does seem to be something interesting to the fact that once the churches reached a certain point of being a social gospel, right, it seems like then people just sort of left the church entirely. Do you think there's something to the fact that once you kind of get this post-Christian Protestantism, the Protestantism itself becomes seemingly unnecessary, and maybe that's part of the decline? Is there a sense in which part of the reason people are leaving mainline denominations is in part because the things which were distinctive about denominations and Protestantism are no longer, right, contained within them? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, as I say, I think it was predetermined, maybe over-determined, that it would move this way in the social gospel movement, or that the social gospel movement defeats itself by being victorious. And I think the answer really is, as Machen would have said in the 1920s, which is where he actually coins the term fundamentalist to describe his biblical inerrancy and the other elements of the kind of Protestantism he and the Philadelphia Seminary put forward. But I think that metaphor that I borrowed from an entirely different context from Wittgenstein about the ladder is incredibly useful for understanding it. Because every one of those social gospel people was a deeply and profoundly biblically educated Christian. But they formed a set of preachings in their genuine and deserved outrage at the industrial condition of America. It was the Triangle Shirt Fire that radicalized Rauschenbusch. He'd come out of Rochester and gone to a parish in New York, and it was, the social condition in Hell's Kitchen that just made him outraged. And so he fed this. An aside, the philosopher Richard Rorty, the previous chancellor, is Rauschenbusch's grandson. So Rauschenbusch is the leader of this, has genuine social concerns. They seem to be entirely deserved. But he preaches a kind of gospel in which, for the people he's preaching to, who've been listening to the Bible preached their whole lives, for them, they can hear this and they'll still know. But their children won't. And their grandchildren will stop going to church, because why do you need to go to church? You're a good person if you've got the social definition of goodness in mind. Rauschenbusch, who was a really interesting rhetorician, I've always liked his prose, calls it the ganglion chain of redeemed individuals. So that we're redeemed by knowing that we oppose these, and we form a kind of ganglion chain that's going to change society. Notice, in that description, there's no word of church. Right? The church, in fact, is replaced by, the idea of the church is replaced by this ganglion chain, and also the idea of denominations. What separates a Baptist from a Methodist? Or Presbyterian, for that matter. These just become tags of no theological difference. The old denominations, Tocqueville looks at them and thinks, Tocqueville actually, in Tocqueville's time, one of the best estimates by some really good historians, Nathan Hatch and others, is that there were somewhere around 137 different denominations of Baptists. Wow. And the time that Tocqueville visits, and it's two seats in the Spirit Baptist, and it's the Green River Baptist, and the list goes on and on and on. Well, Tocqueville is going to look at that and he thinks they hate each other. They're defining themselves by all kinds of really strongly held theological distinctions about revelation and the rapture and church organization, whether you have bishops or not, real presence in the Eucharist, where the Episcopalians are going to have some feeling for it, and the Lutherans a little bit of feeling for it, and then you reach down the line until you get no feeling for it at all. So there are all kinds of distinctions there, but yet somehow they all worked together, even though they fought each other. Well, by the time you reach the 1970s, it's not clear that there's any strong theological reason to be a Presbyterian instead of a Methodist. What's the difference? Well, the Methodist Church is closer. That becomes the difference. The mainline churches all start to blend together in the name of the social gospel, and of course, they lose this idea of Christ. Christ is still proclaimed this great moral teacher, but once we've got the lesson, we don't need him anymore. We've climbed up the ladder the ladder that is Christ, up to the new level of morality, and then we don't need Christ. Then the next generation, we don't need to go to church, right? And then the mainline denominations collapse.